Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Indie Pop Girl, the podcast for music chat, new releases, hidden gems, and nostalgic deep dives. We're continuing with the Underrated Gems series this week with a bit of a record store day twist. I managed to get my hands on a record that until this most recent RSD had never been pressed on coloured vinyl before. Today, we're diving into James Dean Bradfield's solo debut, The Great Western. And before we get into the episode, if you enjoy music discussions like this, please consider following the podcast or leaving a like, depending on where you're listening. It really helps the show reach more people, and it means a lot for a small independent podcast like this one. The Great Western is the debut solo album by the Manic Street Preachers vocalist and guitarist James Dean Bradfield. It was released on the 24th of July 2006 by Columbia Records. The production was handled by James and Manic's regulars Alex Silver and Dave Eringa, with additional production from Guy Massey and Greg Haver. The majority of the lyrics on the record are written by James, with 2 songs co-written with writer John Niven. Manic's bandmate Nicky Wyatt contributes lyrics to the song Bad Boys and Painkillers, and the record overall is a slight departure of previous Manic's releases, with only one track here which dips into political themes in a clever, subtle way. The album title is a reference to the Great Western Railway, which James wrote on his train journeys between Cardiff and Paddington. It's hard to believe that this record is nearly 20 years old, and it hasn't aged one little bit. I have stated previously that the 2000s are my least favourite decade for music. However, there are some exceptions, and this is one of them. A lot of music from around that time can feel dated now, but the real magic of this record is that it's timeless. You can put this on and listen to it front to back, and you wouldn't think, this is a product of 2006. The production is modern, but also has hints of the warm sound and harmonies from the 1970s. Think Steve Harley and Cockney Rebel, George Harrison and ELO. I wouldn't call The Great Western a full-on rock record. It's so much more diverse than that. It's been described as power pop, with a real emphasis on strong melody. James explores a diverse, varied instrumentation throughout the record as well. It has that live band feel weaving through the songs, but James also focuses on texture, incorporating xylophone, harmonica, piano, Rhodes and synths. The result is an absolutely beautiful record with some killer songwriting and, of course, James's trademark vocals. He sings like an angel on this record, especially on the toned-down ballads. He still displays his powerful range, but the album contains some of the strongest, controlled vocals of his entire career. To be honest, I could hear him sing anything and it would still sound wonderful. I wanted to include The Great Western as part of the Underrated Gems series, as the record is exactly that. I don't know if this would be accurate, but if you aren't a fan of the Manic Street Preachers, then I would assume that not many people would even know this exists. I just don't hear people mention or talk about this outside of the Manics fandom, and the record deserves its own spotlight, to stand on its own as a complete body of work. Also, the record has been pressed onto coloured vinyl for the very first time as part of Record Store Day this year. When I saw the announcement a few months ago, I couldn't believe that it was actually happening. If you want to find out about my first experience participating in RSD, then I'll talk about it later on in the episode. But this is perfect timing to finally cover this wonderful record on my podcast. And if you are familiar with it, then I hope you will enjoy revisiting the tracks. And if you are new, even if you aren't a Mannix fan, I guarantee that you will find so much to enjoy in the Great Western because it truly is a special record. As I have mentioned in previous episodes, I will not be playing clips of the songs, so if you are curious, then please support the artists I cover by streaming, downloading, or buying physical copies. Thank you. Track 1, That's No Way to Tell a Lie. So the album opens with That's No Way to Tell a Lie, which was released as the lead single back in July 2006, and I think it sets a tone for the record perfectly. Straight away, you can hear that slight shift away from the heavier, more layered sound of the Manic Street Preachers. This leans much more into polished power pop. You've got the hand claps, the harmonies, and those really uplifting synths in the chorus that just make it feel instantly accessible. It's got that driving, radio-friendly energy to it, but there's still something a little more thoughtful underneath. It's not just a straightforward pop song. There's a bit of an indie edge to it as well, which stops it from feeling too clean or predictable. What I really like here is how James gives himself space. Compared to the Manics, where everything can feel quite dense and layered, this track is open, like the songwriting is front and centre. It's a bit more personal, a bit more reflective. Lyrically, it touches on honesty and communication, but in a really understated way. It's not overly dramatic. It gives the impression of those small internal thoughts you have, which actually ties in really nicely with the whole idea of the album being written on that Great Western Railway journey. It's quite observational, like passing thoughts as everything moves around you. And I think you can definitely trace some of this back to Lifeblood from 2004. That album showed a softer, more melodic side to the band, but where Lifeblood could feel quite cold and distant at times, the Great Western is much warmer and more human. So, as an opener, it works like a reset. It's James stepping slightly away from the band and reintroducing himself in a more direct, personal way. And it sets you up for an album that's less about big statements and more about those quieter in between moments. Track 2, An English Gentleman. Next up is An English Gentleman, which was released as a second single, and this one serves as a tribute to the late Manics publicist Philip Hall. It's a really warm, uplifting track, and to me, it feels like it could have come straight out of the 1970s. That's down to the production choices and the melodic structure. There's something very nostalgic about it, but not in a way that is forced. It just has that natural classic feel. The tone is very intentional as well. There's a real sense of sentimentality running through it, but it never becomes too heavy. It's quite light on its feet, with some really beautiful melodies and a vocal performance from James that is so passionate and heartfelt. This is actually a track I've always associated with Make Me Smile, Come Up and See Me by Steve Harley and Cockney Rebel, released in 1975. Both songs are built around that bright, rhythmic acoustic guitar, and they share those stop-start dynamics that give them a slightly theatrical, almost conversational feel. You can hear it in the way the song moves, those little pauses and shifts in tempo. They keep it playful and engaging. Even the acoustic guitar solo here feels like a subtle nod to the Steve Harley classic. The backing vocal harmonies are another highlight. They're quite sophisticated and they really add to that sense of warmth and richness, not just on this track, but across the whole album. It feels like James is drawing from that mid 70s space where glam rock started blending into art pop. And that's something critics picked up on at the time as well. That the Great Western leans into that more romantic, celebratory sound, moving away from the angst that you'd typically associate with the Manic Street Preachers. So, this track is like a real moment of appreciation, both musically and personally, and it adds another layer to the album's sense of reflection and looking back as the journey unfolds. Track 3, Bad Boys and Painkillers. This track features lyrics written by Nicky Wire, which immediately gives it a slightly darker edge. Lyrically, it does move into more shadowy territory. There's a sense of escapism in there, maybe even self destruction. But what's really interesting is how that contrasts with the sound of the track, because musically it doesn't go where you might expect. Instead of leaning into something heavy or abrasive, James keeps that warm 1970s inspired palette going. You've got the harmonica in there, that really rich acoustic guitar running throughout, and then it all opens up into this soaring, almost uplifting chorus. It creates this really interesting tension between the subject matter and the sound. The production plays a big part in that as well. Everything is polished, but still organic. The production doesn't come across as overworked. It just flows really naturally and keeps the record feeling cohesive. Vocally, this is one of those tracks where James really shows his range. He starts off quite restrained, almost conversational, then gradually builds into something much more powerful, especially in the chorus. And when those backing vocals come in, it just lifts the whole thing. It's one of those moments on the album that kind of sneaks upon you. It might not be the most immediate track at first, but the more you sit with it, the more it reveals itself. I have been listening to this record quite a bit recently, and it's always interesting coming back to projects and hearing them differently. It's the kind of song that grows on you over time, especially once you start paying attention to the vocal layers and the details in the arrangement. Track 4, On Saturday Morning We Will Rule the World. This track feels like a bit of a shift from some of the more guitar led moments on the album. This song leans much more into a melodic piano driven sound. The verses are quite mellow, quite reflective, and then it opens up into a more upbeat chorus, but it never loses that sense of softness. The piano really carries the whole track, and it gives it a slightly different texture compared to what we've heard so far. The production is really clean as well, which allows everything to breathe, especially James's vocals and that central melody. Nothing in the arrangement is crowded, it all just sits really naturally. And this is where that 1970s thread running through the album really starts to show off itself lyrically as well as musically. There are some really specific references in here that ground the song in a particular time. The lyrics could work in the context of the early 80s, but for me, I instantly imagined James growing up in Wales during the 70s. He mentions things like you could catch it on a tape cassette, and a Ford Capri and a telephone, and it just instantly paints a picture. The Ford Capri, for anyone who might not know, was a really popular car in the UK, built by Ford between 1968 and 1986. And my dad had one in the 70s, and it was often seen as a kind of affordable, everyday sports car. So it carries a lot of nostalgia for that era. And I love how personal this is. I actually really relate to that line about falling asleep to the national anthem. I grew up in the 80s and I remember doing the exact same thing. So it adds this extra layer where the nostalgia isn't just his, it becomes something shared that you can relate to. The ruling the world on a Saturday morning back then meant no school. Saturday morning cartoons, sitting in your pyjamas eating cereal, and then going shopping for records and cassettes. It almost comes across as a full circle moment within the album. James reflecting on those early memories, maybe even a simpler time growing up in Wales, while physically moving forward on that Great Western journey. There's this constant interplay between the past and present. And that's what makes it so interesting. The production is clearly inspired by those warm, classic 70s sounds, but it still feels timeless. Even though this came out in 2006, it honestly wouldn't sound out of place if it was released now. Track 5, Run Romeo Run. Run Romeo Run is probably the most overtly political moment on the album, but even then, it's handled very differently to what you might expect. The lyrics reference Romeo Dallaire, who was the force commander of the United Nations peacekeeping mission in Rwanda during the genocide in the early 1990s. So it's drawing from a really heavy real world context. But what's interesting is how James approaches it. If this was a Manic Street Preachers track, it might be much more direct, much more confrontational. There's a nuance to it, like he's processing the weight of it rather than shouting about it. Musically, there's a noticeable shift as well. The instrumentation feels a bit heavier, especially in the lead up to the chorus, with those galloping drums from David Lewin of Super Furry Animals. It gives the track a sense of urgency, like it's constantly pushing forward. Then, when the chorus hits, it really opens up. And this is where James's vocal performance just takes over. He absolutely goes for it here. It's powerful, full bodied, and it cuts right through the mix. It also works really well in the context of the album. Coming at this point, it acts as a bit of a turning point, a shift in energy before you move into the second half of the record. So, even though it touches on something political, it still fits within the album's overall tone. It's less about making a statement and more about capturing a feeling, that sense of urgency, weight, and reflection as the journey continues. If you're listening right now and enjoying this is your cue to hit the like before you forget. I really do appreciate all of the support. Thank you. Track 6, still a long way to go. As we reach the halfway point in the record, this track is the album's first true light as in the air ballad. It trades the upbeat power pop of the earlier tracks for something emotional and more exposed. This is arguably one of James's most technical and emotional vocal takes on the record. Because the music stays relatively restrained for the first half, his voice has to carry the entire emotional weight. It starts in a lower, more conversational register and builds into that signature, passionate James vocal. reaching for those high notes that feel earned rather than forced. The song captures a sense of weary perseverance. This track is like a moment of honest reflection, acknowledging how far he's come, perhaps with the Manics or in life, but admitting there is still a massive distance left to travel. It lacks the shield of irony or high concept politics, feeling like a very direct look into James's own mindset at the time. The guitar solo is interesting with the xylophone in the production. The way the xylophone mimics or doubles the guitar lines adds a unique texture that you rarely hear in standard rock solos. It gives the solo a slightly whimsical, childlike quality, which is beautiful. The xylophone cuts right through. It gives the melody a crystalline edge, which you wouldn't expect from a record released in 2006. Because James's vocal performance is so big and passionate on this track, having a delicate instrument like the xylophone in the solo prevents a song from becoming too heavy or over the top. It provides a moment of light to balance the shade. Track 7, Emigre. Along with Run Romeo Run, this leans more into a slightly heavy arrangement driven by the electric guitar. I would say that it's also got a loose, classic manic sound due to the lyrical content of travelling from Cardiff to Paddington on the Great Western. The title itself refers to someone who has left their own country to settle in another. It's the ultimate expression of the album's core theme. This is James's solo statement and perhaps the track where he most clearly defines his own identity apart from the Manics. Placed right after the vulnerability of Still a Long Way to Go, Emigre feels like the journey continuing. It's the road song of the album. It has a wind in the hair momentum, especially in the chorus, that suggests someone driving across the Welsh borders, caught between the life they left behind and the one they are reclaiming. This track is a special one for my husband and I. We would play this album on our road trips to Abu Dhabi in Wales, and whenever I hear the intro, it instantly takes me back driving by the sea with the sun setting. It's been quite a while since we have been back there, but hearing this record again has got me thinking about Abu Dhabi and how peaceful and beautiful it is there. I will never stop being amazed at James's vocal performance in this track, especially in that soaring chorus. Holy shit, it gives me the chills. It's one of those moments where he reminds everyone that he is one of the best pure rock vocalists of his generation. Track 8, To See a Friend in Tears. This track is the only cover on the record, and this is such an inspired choice. A cover from Jacques Brel's final album in 1977 is a slight variant of the Momus translation from 1986. This is the most stripped back moment on the entire record, and I don't think this would have the same impact if the song had a full arrangement and production. This is all about James's stunning vocal performance. I know it's difficult to choose, as there are many standout James vocals from his career, but this track is a highlight for me. The control in his voice is fucking mind-blowing. His cadence and the way his voice flows over the acoustic guitar is a thing of beauty. It's difficult trying to find the words, and to be honest, I really can't give this track the full justice talking about it. If you are unfamiliar with this record and you only listen to one track, please listen to this because it's truly special. It never fails to give me chills, and hearing this on vinyl for the very first time recently was the icing on the cake. It's completely stunning, and it will move you in every way. Track 9, Say Hello to the Pope. So, I talked about the 1970s vibes earlier on. Well, they are back in Say Hello to the Pope. From the George Harrison-esque slide guitar to the backing vocals, it's got that nostalgic feeling like you've heard it somewhere before. It's a bit of fun, and James really lets his personality come through. It's catchy as hell too, with some lovely production. Verse 2 is arguably the most intimate and romantic moment on the entire record, and it feels like a very personal snapshot of someone James knows and admires. The line, "You can swear all you like, but you're still such a beautiful girl," captures a rough around the edges charm. It suggests he loves her for her fire and her flaws, not just a polished image. Mentioning her walking through the door in her Sunday best ties back to the album's themes of Welsh tradition and small town life. It's a very grounded domestic image of beauty. The lines, "So just one more cigarette and a vodka for you. I'll even dance the old time music for you," show a playful, willing to do anything kind of affection. He's happy to indulge her habits and even embarrass himself by dancing just to see her smile. It's lovely and so refreshing to see this softer, more romantic side to James. And this is what makes this record so unique, and then it separates from the Manic's discography. Usually, James writes the music to Nicky Wire's lyrics, and while that is great and amazing, I'm glad that James pursued a solo career to have the full creative freedom and to deliver amazing projects like The Great Western. Track 10, The Wrong Beginning. I've always thought that this track is a love song, which to me could be a continuation to the previous track. Whereas Say Hello to the Pope was fun and a bit playful, The Wrong Beginning is softer and warmer. My interpretation is that the casual connection is turned into something much deeper and more serious. The lyrics in the chorus, "To draw the perfect circle and sew the perfect girl," suggests a sense of completion. If the rest of the album is about finding home in a geographical sense, this song is about finding home in a person. It's James moving from describing her habits to describing her soul. I think the "surrendering your peace of mind" line is the clincher for it being a deep love song. It acknowledges that starting a real relationship involves a risk. She is giving up her peace of mind, her independence or safety to be with him. It's a very mature, slightly heavy way to describe falling in love, which fits the more serious tone of this track compared to the dancing in the previous song. I also get a warm soul, gospel, R&B feel to the track, and you can really hear that Motown DNA in the way the backing vocals are arranged. It gives the track a warmth that shifts it away from the standard indie rock and into that classic soul territory. It's a sound that suits James's versatile vocal range, and I would love for him to explore this kind of sound in the future if he ever decides to do another solo project. Track 11, Which Way to Kiffin. There has been speculation on the internet about the introduction to this song. Many have thought that James sampled "Oh Superman" by Laurie Anderson, and after a lot of digging and searching, there is no official Laurie Anderson sample on the track. I even checked the liner notes to the recent RSD vinyl release to make sure I'm not going mad either. Instead, James recreated the method behind Laurie's most famous loop to achieve a similar effect. And I think it's a direct homage to Oh Superman, which became an unexpected hit in the UK back in 1981. It seems that James has used a synth to mimic the specific rhythmic interval and tone without asking permission for a sample clearance. Like Oh Superman, Which Way to Kiffin also has this ghostly atmospheric quality that is quite haunting but beautiful at the same time. I have always thought that Oh Superman is so fucking eerie and it really gives me the creeps. I think that is the intention, but I would love to know if my listeners out there feel the same. This track is dedicated to the celebrated Welsh landscape painter Sir Kyffin Williams and closes out the Great Western beautifully. While the ha 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 pulse is a stylistic nod to Laurie Anderson's Oh Superman, I always thought that the sound sort of kind of mimics the moving sound of a train. The steady mechanical hum of the loop mimics the repetitive hypnotic rhythm of a train in motion, and James using the strum of the acoustic guitar as a guide. It acts as a sonic bookend for an album named after a railway line. By ending the album with a song that sounds like it's moving, he's literally taking the listener on that final journey back to Wales and to the landscape of Kyffin Williams. You would think that pulling influence from avant-garde pop in a record deeply rooted in the 1970s with hints of soul would be the biggest hot mess of all time. But what James does so beautifully is that he weaves these influences and techniques into his songs. You can hear the ambition and his love for all genres of music. It all comes together so perfectly. As the track fades out, it gives the impression that James has come full circle and finally completed his journey on the Great Western. As I mentioned earlier on in the episode, the Great Western was finally pressed onto coloured vinyl for the very first time as part of Record Store Day this year. It's honestly perfect timing with the record turning 20 years old. I still find that hard to believe. In 2006, the UK charts were dominated by the indie sleaze explosion, with bands like the Kooks, the Fratellis, and the peak of the Razorlight era. By drawing from the Motown soul of the 60s and the George Harrison faces melodic rock of the 70s, James built the album on a musical language that is essentially permanent. Classic sounds don't date because they aren't trying to be trendy in the first place. The production is lush, warm, with layers that give it a prestige that still sounds expensive and rich today. If you follow me on social media, then you might have seen my mini vlog of participating in RSD this year. As soon as this album was announced on the list, I knew that I wanted to experience RSD for the very first time. It's a record worth queuing up for, and together with the Wolf Alice live 7-inch single, that is enough motivation for me to get up at 4 a.m. on a Saturday morning. My husband and I travelled to Spinning Around Records, which I've mentioned on the podcast before. It is my favourite record store and worth a visit if you're in the Telford area in the UK. We joined the queue at around 6 a.m. and we were 71 in line. We were so lucky with the weather. It was cold, but the sun was coming out, and it was a beautiful morning. Everyone was so friendly, some had camped out during the night, and overall there was a nice, relaxed, chilled vibe. I passed the time away by listening to some music on my phone. And by the way, Hatchie's Giving the World Away record really hits early in the morning during sunrise. It's a record that I've recently covered on the podcast, and that ethereal dream pop really helped to settle my nerves. I was a bit nervous on the morning as I didn't know what to expect. My husband got us some hot chocolate which warmed us up, and before we knew it, the store opened up at 8 a.m. We had a bit of a wait, and I think this was the hardest part. If we were to do it again, I will most definitely be taking a chair of some sort. By this time, my back was in bits, but I didn't give up. I stayed patient, and eventually we got closer to the entrance to the shop. I wore my furry leopard print coat, which is very Mannix coded. If you know, you know. And I felt like I looked the part for the occasion. By the time we got inside the store, we were served very quickly. I just want to take this opportunity to thank Emma and her team at Spinning Around Records. They truly made the morning so much fun and enjoyable. They worked so hard making sure everyone was served as quickly as possible and giving the queue regular out of stock live updates. I was so lucky that the 2 titles I wanted didn't sell out, and it was worth getting out of bed for. When I saw them on the counter, it was a proper holy shit moment. I couldn't believe it. I will always get so excited about vinyl, and it was beautiful seeing other folk getting excited and seeing so many happy, smiling faces. If you're thinking of picking up the Great Western on vinyl, you might be able to find a copy online. I had such a lovely and emotional experience listening to it on vinyl for the very first time the other day. I just want to say that Columbia have done a stellar job with the mastering of this release. It sounds wonderful. The orange marble variant is perfect and matches the album's aesthetic. The vintage Columbia Santa label made me feel so much joy. I love and appreciate little details like that, and the RSD release has been well thought out with the gatefold. Even the hype sticker is beautiful. If you want to see the vinyl in all its glory, make sure you are following me on my socials because the pressing is absolutely stunning. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode. If you've enjoyed it, I'd really appreciate it if you could follow, like or share, as it helps other music lovers discover my podcast. If you're listening on YouTube, don't forget to like this episode and subscribe to the Indie Pop Girl podcast. It really helps the algorithm push the video out to more people, and as a small independent podcast that's still growing, every like and subscription genuinely makes a huge difference. I'm posting full episodes, shorts and little teasers over there, so there's always something new to watch. Let me know in the comments if you love this record and if you managed to get a copy during RSD. I always read and respond to comments, and I love hearing what you all think. You can also find me on Instagram and Threads at the Indie Pop Girl, and on TikTok at the Indie Pop Girl podcast. And if you want to dive even deeper, there's a public Spotify playlist called Favourite Tracks from Podcast Episodes, where I add some of my top picks from each record I cover. It's updated as new episodes drop, so you might just find your next obsession. I'll be back very soon for another instalment in the Underrated Gems series. I'll be talking about a 2003 pop record from an artist who I've already covered on the podcast and has a connection to the Manic Street Preachers. Until then, I'm Rachel, the indie pop girl. Thanks for listening, take care, stay safe, and I'll see you next time.